Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's time to grab your gear and start running along with 11-time Western States endurance run finisher, sports journalist and author John Trent, as he tries to catch up with the ultra runners, race directors, and members of this ever-growing community. Let's see who he caught up with here today. John, who'd you bring with you?
Well, yeah, thanks, Paul. Today we have a really great guest with us. Angela Shartel is one of those great people in our sport. Not only is she an accomplished ultra runner and competitor, she's won some of the toughest, most prestigious races around, like Angela's Crest, for example, held the course record there. The Fat Dog 120 in British Columbia, which is a really, really tough race. The Bear, Massanutten 100 in Virginia, just to name a number of her greatest hits, that races that Angela's won. But also, Angela is the co-race director of the San Diego 100, which is, in my opinion, one of the best races in all of the country. And she's a valued member of the community, just in the way she has always given back. And so, Angela, we're really, really happy to have you on the show today.
Thanks, John. I'm happy to be here.
I wanted to start out by asking you, Ange, let's not quite at the beginning for you, but close. If you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about how you grew up. I think it's important to kind of get an insight into a person by the way they grew up. I mean, you were all over the place, traveling all over the world. Share a little bit about your upbringing, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, it's interesting. I wouldn't say all over the world, but I actually, in my opinion, grew up with a very sheltered life. My dad was in the military, in the Navy. And so I was just a military brat, and he loved Japan. And so I was actually born and raised in Japan, with the exception of having a tour duty of 4 years on Guam. And so we just moved every 4 to 6 years to different parts of Japan, and always lived on the base, with the exception of when we lived in Yokosuka when I was really young, elementary age, and we lived 3 years out off the base before we moved on to the base. So a very small life. And I ended up becoming a pretty rebellious teenager, trying to break out of the cage, so to speak. But it was a safe way to rebel, I guess, because of the confines of the base, and just the Japanese culture and community of people are just the kindest people I've ever met. And so not too much trouble you could get into, at least not too much I got into, thankfully.
Ange, when you're growing up like that and you're part of a military family, and, every few years you're moving, as a child, you have to make new friends. How has that helped you as you've gotten older? Because I've always found, like, kids who come from that sort of background, they have this ability to, even though they might be a little bit introverted personally, or whatever, they know how to connect with people. Did that help you at all in terms of having to, every few years, maybe having a new set of friends?
I think it made me resilient. It put friendships in my life that became my family. My dad was gone most of my life, deployed out at sea, and my mom had her own struggles, essentially being a single mom to a great extent. And so she was just trying to keep everything running. So there wasn't a lot of family time. I didn't grow up with a lot of traditions, and my friends became very important to me. And I think that still holds true to this day. And I've always sought out deep and meaningful relationships. I've not ever been interested in just superficial conversations. I think it's a great welcome, but I really want to understand people. And I feel like getting to know them can really change my life, our lives, just as much as we can affect others.
You have a great way of connecting with people, Ange, and it's always really, really meaningful from the time a person meets you and throughout the time that they know you. And I'm curious too about, your path to becoming a runner, because I think it tells us a couple of things, that it's not a process where, because you didn't follow the traditional process of, especially being an elite competitor, where, you might have run in college, you might have, run right out of college, and that was the focus. You had an entirely different path that led you into running. And I think it's one that's really accessible to a lot of people in terms of the challenges we face. If you wouldn't mind, talk about that a little bit.
You know, it's interesting. When I first came into the sport, one of the people who I consider one of my mentors said to me, people who are good at ultra running have been training for it their whole life. And I found that just to be something that really struck me. As I said, I was constantly striving or searching rather for those connections. And in doing that, there were some hardships along the way, and I got myself into I'll say a series of bad relationships, which then ultimately led to a very dysfunctional marriage and abusive marriage. And I think that there were also other hardships. You know, when I got pregnant with my first child, she was born with a serious heart condition. I was faced with a lot of questions and options. And again, going back to the family, I didn't have those leaders to seek out their advice or counsel. And so a lot of it was sink or swim. And I think that that's sort of what gave me the strength when it came time to run. So I battled those hardships for the most part alone. And it was a silent struggle. And I had a lot of embarrassment and shame to talk about it. And so you're going to get me crying right off the start. And so, those hardships led to an eating addiction for me. So I'm trying to consolidate the story. So it became a food addiction for me, and it led to anxiety and depression. And I didn't have an outlet for that. So I opted to take medication. And in doing that, I've always said to myself, I really like catchphrases and sayings about life and things. They seem to be something that I can pull quick from my memory to help me, gain strength or inspiration. And so one of the sayings I adopted was, you can spiral up or spiral down. And I was spiraling down very quickly. And that led to my obesity, the food addiction. And then that in turn led to high blood pressure, anxiety, depression, and all of the side effects that go with that. And so what happened was that all came to a head. And the way my doctor described it, I thought was pretty great. I didn't understand what was happening. And he said, think of yourself as holding a Thanksgiving plate, and you have all of the food on the plate and it's stuffed to the top and it's barely balancing, and put it on a pencil and add a couple peas and the whole thing topples over. He goes, you're at that place where everything's toppling over and you can't manage it. So you're at the point where you need to make a decision. And so it was then that I was talking to my doctor, and she had pointed out to me, in all of my annual checkups, how I had been gaining X amount of weight every year. And I was telling her, I'm still having anxiety, I'm still having bouts of depression, and I don't know what to do. And she said, well, we can up your medication. That's probably the best way to get the symptoms to dissipate. But I know that I've always had anxiety about taking medication as well. And so something struck me in her office, and I just said, how do we stop all of it? And how do we get off all the medication and just start over and reset? And that's when she said, you have to lose weight. And I don't know if there's scientific truth to it or not. I never did look it up because it worked for me, but I asked her, how do I do that? And it's no surprise that it's calories in and calories out. But what she told me was, the quickest formula is to take the weight that you think you should be or you're desiring to be and add a 0. And if you eat that many calories a day, then you'll maintain that weight. If you go above, you'll gain; below, you'll lose. And so that was probably the beginning of my new path that ultimately led to ultra running. And what happened was, I thought that I was looking and talking to her and just determined that a healthy weight for me would be around 130. And so I went from eating what I found out to be about 3,000 or so calories a day down to 1,300. And I maintained it. I did fall off the wagon one night, and that was sort of a turning point for me. It was I don't know what, a stressful day or what, but I ended up eating a whole pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And I looked at it and I go, wow, so that's all the calories for today. So I have a choice to make at lunchtime. Do I either stop eating and figure it out and do better tomorrow? Or do I say, you know what, it's okay. It's just a little slip up. And being the type A personality that I am, I told myself I was done eating for the day. And what that triggered for me was a lot of independent research on diet and food and calories and nutrient quality and stuff, because being that I had food addiction, my biggest goal was how can I eat the most food with the least amount of calories? And so it sort of started from there. And then I went to the gym 3 times a week, but I never ran. I gave myself a year to lose the weight. I thought that was the healthiest way to go. And I saw my doctor along the way. And at the end of the year, my goal was to lose 65 pounds, and I fell short by 5 pounds and considered it a failure. And that failure is what got me into running. So,
yeah, we're so hard on ourselves, throughout these kinds of processes.
Right.
Yeah. And, but yet you knew that there are ways that you could continue on this journey, and then running kind of presented itself, and you had an affinity for it. You may not have known it, but you did. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about how, that went quickly from, road running into the world of ultras.
Okay. Well, like you said, I was super hard on myself. And I think it's important to recognize that it was a huge blessing that I had a friend in my life at that critical time who said, look, this doesn't have to be the end. If you want, we can start training for this, something in a new way. And like I said, that's when she proposed running to me. And she said, and in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to either consider it a failure and go back to doing nothing, or take this leap of faith with this friend. And so she proposed that we do the 21-mile Big Sur walk jog together. And so I had no idea about anything with running. I mean, the only relationship I had with running was when I was in high school. I was on a cross country team. And I was on every sport that the high school offered, because in Japan, they took you by plane and you could miss a week of school and go to all these different places and compete. So I didn't care if I was good. None of that mattered. I cared about getting out of school for a week and hanging out with my friends. And when I joined the cross country team because I wanted to go to Korea, I quickly regretted it. It was the hardest sport of all of them. And so sadly, when I got to Korea, I did one event and then I became ill. I was like, I really am feeling sick. I'm feeling nauseous. I can't do this. And I went back to school and I left the cross country team. And so that was probably about 15 or so years old. It was not even, I don't think I even lasted a semester. And I never ran again till what we're talking, and I was 32. And so that was the only relationship that I had with running. And so she said, well, I'll give you this grid, to follow, and we'll just go out and we'll run together when we can. And so I'm looking, she gives me this training plan, and I'm just seeing all the numbers on it. And I'm going, okay, well, it starts out with 3 miles. I had never run 3 miles. I would walk on the treadmill as part of my 3 times a week training plan. And I got out and ran on the trail right behind my house. And I thought I was going to die. I think I was like a 14-minute mile, and I really was just almost crying. I had side aches. I was panting. I was just like, oh my gosh, this is never going to happen. But then I thought also about that weight loss journey and said, well, you have the two choices. And like I said earlier, the spiral up or spiral down. And so instead of looking at it as a defeat, once I could catch my breath again, I decided that it was going to be an opportunity. And my goal was to bring that 14-minute mile down as far as I can. And then I continued to follow that grid, and I got out with my girlfriend when I could. And then this was in January. So my weight loss journey was January 1st to December 31st. And then here we were in January again. And the marathon was in April, which turned out to be a marathon. But I thought I was doing this walk jog clear up until I was tapering. And people would see the change and they'd see me out running and ask what I was doing. And every time I said walk jog, they would ask if I'm doing a marathon. And I'm like, I don't know what a marathon is. And so finally I asked my friend, I go, everybody keeps talking to me about about the marathon. I go, what is the marathon? She goes, oh, that's the 26-mile one. And I just threw my hands up. I go, are you kidding me? We're falling 5 miles shy of anything anybody even knows about after I've just been killing myself to train. So that was when I abandoned our team effort for the walk jog at the expo. And it was this big to do, because I walked in and I said, I think I'd like to upgrade to the marathon. And they go, you mean downgrade to the half? I go, no, the 26-mile one. And they're like, okay, well, we're going to need to take you through and talk to the director. So I had no idea the race director. I had no understanding of racing at all. They took me down the hall in a convention center behind a curtain, and I thought, I don't even know what I'm signing up and agreeing to do now, second guessing everything. And I'm talking to the race director and telling him what I want to do. And he goes, well, what's your longest run been? And I'm like, okay, well, my longest run has been 21.6 miles. And I did it in X hours, and I'm doing this pace. And he goes, okay, we'll put you in the marathon. I go, you think that's good enough? And he's like, I think you're going to do great. I had so much anxiety the entire time. And then for Big Sur, there's a long bus ride out to the start into the Redwoods. And I was just sitting there with, a bus full of strangers and the poor person next to me. I'm just like, hey, so you're doing this too? How long have you trained? Are you nervous? And so I'm just talking through all of my anxiety. And he goes, you know what? At some point, we just got to run, and it'll just all work itself out. And no truer words have I heard. It was really great. And so that became my journey with running. And I sorted out so many things through my now, ex-marriage in that training. And that lasted 4-ish years that I became like that marathon I upgraded to. I had just missed Boston. So that became the new goal to what's Boston? And then I needed to try and go to Boston, and then just kept making new goals for myself. And then that same friend said, hey, how about we change it up and go in the trails? And so I hated the trails the first time I went there. I was my ankles were not strong. I was rolling on rocks. It was a constant stop and go. Because again, the only trail I had run was that first 3-mile trail when I decided I don't even know if I can breathe anymore and do this. So then it was all roads, and I went back on the trail this 4 years after. And she said, look, just give me a week and we'll go 4 times. And if you hate it after a week, then I'll never ask you to join me again. And so of course, I didn't hate it, and I fell in love with it. And then that led to Catalina Marathon. So that was my first marathon in dirt. And then that was where I saw everybody with the 50K shirts and 100-mile shirts and all of the ultra distances. And I'm asking my friend, I'm like, is that running? She goes, yeah, I think it is. And I'm like, well, if they can do that, I want to try and do that. And so that's what led to the beginning of ultras.
Yeah. And then obviously you had a great deal of success. And I apologize for asking you about all the challenges, but I think they're super important here. So I'm going to ask you about
I feel like it's long-winded, so I apologize. I don't consolidate very well.
No, it's great. It really is. But obviously, I mean, and you're going to deflect this, but you were one of the best ultra runners, around. for many years there. You had a great run where, you were winning big races. You were top 10 at Western States, you're doing all this stuff. And then, want to ask you about, like, then you started feeling some numbness, in your foot, the cramps you'd be getting in your legs, just kind of the sort of general discomfort. I remember you came and you ran Silver State, our race here in Reno, and you were right in the midst of that. It was just kind of like this odd thing that kept popping up. And then, what did that lead to, Ange? And also, after explaining what it led to, kind of give us a feeling of where you are now as a runner, relative to that, because that was a big thing that you had to face.
Yeah, that was a big transition. And I always say, with regard to being really good in the sport, when I started, I was a big fish in a little pond, so I was going around running races when there still weren't a ton of women competing. And so I definitely was aware of that. And I feel like
you're being too humble here. You're being too humble. Anyway,
a lot of the runs, I won't go into that, but yeah, it is what it is. But you're right. When I ran Silver State, that was a huge transition for me. It scared me. I had been running races and I'd always done really well in the heat. And again, back to that type A personality, I was just regimented with my miles, my workout, my diet, my sleep. I kept track and records of everything. And each race I would cramp and it would not subside. And I went through, magnesium and potassium and my hydration and salt during the race and everything seemed spot on. And yet I would get these cramps that would make my entire legs lock up and I couldn't move. And Silver State probably was the worst that it had happened. It happened probably 4 or 5 times on the course where I was just standing there for several minutes and I needed to wait for it to just release. And then when I got to the finish line, it looked like restless leg syndrome. There were just crawling, my legs just looked like crawling critters up and down my calves, and it scared me. And so I was talking to Jenny there at the time, her and her husband, and I was like, this has never been to this extreme before. And so went back to their house and rehydrated and stuff, and then came home. And 4 days later, it still had not stopped. And so I went into the doctor and I said, look, I did a 50-mile race, but this is what's happening. And it never subsides. And so he was concerned. He said it definitely isn't normal. He took some blood work, and my blood work was, what is it that they test for states, or when you're muscle damage or whatever? That was off the charts.
Yeah.
And which is not
the CPK
surprising.
level. The CPK level. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was crazy high. And he's a sports doctor. And so he goes, look, I'm not going to tell you to stop running, but I'm going to ask you to not run for 1 week and let's retest this. He goes, I think it's from the race, but in case it's not. And so we retested it, and the levels were down, but I don't even know what it's called. The twitching in my legs was not stopping. So that led me to, he referred me to a neurologist. And then I ended up with a spine doctor. And ultimately, after some nerve studies and a bunch of different tests, I got to the spine doctor, and he said that I have a collapsed disc. And the collapsed disc is pinching a nerve on my spine that's controlling the twitching in my legs. And that's why it's not subsiding. And the only way to fix it would be surgery. And so at the time I was in great shape, and I was really excited to go back to Mogollon, because the first year I had done it, the race had gotten canceled at mile 50 and due to the weather. And so I had wanted to go back for several years, and I finally was fit enough to go back. And now he said, well, again, I go, well, can I run that? And he said, I'm not going to tell you can't run it, but I can tell you that a fall will create permanent damage possibly, and heat will not be good for your situation. And so I'm going, okay, I'm going to Arizona, on all these up and down these mountains there, and terrible terrain for, potential falls. So I made the decision to pull out. And I think it was the day after the race took place, I went in for surgery. And then so I was afraid for so much. My biggest thing was that I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to run hundreds again. And what would that mean in my life? So I took the recovery very seriously. It was a successful surgery. And then I started walking. And because I had already retired several years before then, I had the time on my hands. And so I just started walking the trails and miles that I would run. And I found myself at like 70 to 80 miles a week walking. And so I started looking at races, and I've never been a loop course person, but I thought it was the safest way to test if I could run 100 miles. So I signed up for Coldwater, and I went out there, and I think I got cleared to run a couple weeks before, and I ran 120-mile run. And I just told myself I was going to walk the ups, jog the flats, and run the downs. And it ended up being successful for, as the race right after my surgery. And that gave me a good boost of confidence that at least my running wouldn't be over, even though I don't know what it actually would look like from there on out. And it hasn't been bad by any means. I feel like, I was able to get back in and do the races that I still wanted to do. I had this, when I first became an ultra runner, this standing bucket list of hundreds that I wanted to complete, and Hard Rock being the last one of them. And so I was still able to go and do, I think, 2 or 3 after that. But I definitely, it doesn't come as easy. And I don't know if it's just your body going through surgery. I don't know if it's aging, because I also have that where, I'm going to be 50, and I had the good fortune of developing all these hormone changes on the earlier side rather than the later side. And so, it's a different relationship with your body. And it's also, in recognizing that, a different relationship with running. And so I am very thankful that because of the mentors in my life, I was able to step back, and Scott Mills being specifically one who would constantly talk about aging and the process and your relationship with running and the sport of ultra running. And to my good fortune and benefit, at that point, a couple of years ago, I looked back and said, what I love about running is the relationships that I've built in the sport, going back to childhood, that I've never been in one place long enough to build those kind of deep relationships. And I love being outside, and I love moving. And those things are not contingent upon, racing well and doing extreme distances. And so I was able to just step back and say, what, I do feel good about where I'm at, and I don't need to push myself to prove to myself anything more. So.
That's beautifully said. And, I think as we're kind of wrapping up here a little bit, I want to ask you finally, I think it's a good place to maybe wrap up. The San Diego 100, I think, really encapsulates a lot of what you just mentioned, how it's a really, really special race. It has a special vibe. It has a special feeling to it. It's like whenever somebody goes to run it, it feels like they're embraced from the moment they get there until the moment they finish. How does the San Diego 100 kind of represent maybe where you are right now in your life in terms of your relationship with running and what it really means to you?
I think it represents it very well, just with the people. And my relationship with running came from, to a degree, escaping my marriage and working through this, these different issues that I had with anxiety, depression, and overeating, and this need to be approved by everybody and liked by everybody, and just thinking that was connected to only my success in running, because I had not known otherwise. I've lived a life where, once again, you've been training for it your whole life, where I constantly had to prove myself. And that's a hard uphill battle to sustain. And the demons are strong on that journey. And so I think that to be able to go through that and unpack it and expose it for what it is, and then bring in the truth of, these people love you for you, and you love running because of what it gives you in the community and physically, not because you're winning or you're trying to prove things to people, and most of all yourself. So I think that to expose all of that and then choose a path that, was so graciously given to BJ and I, and to be able to embrace it and then go, you know what, this is what it is all about. This is where we can run, we can be outside, we can also be stewards of this beautiful race and continue to help people achieve their goals and feel like they're coming home. And through us leading it and deciding to do the parties that we do and the training runs we do, it allows us to develop the relationships that I think we're all seeking in the sport, that hopefully for most people hold true the same as for me, that they go beyond running. So.
It's beautifully stated. I'm going to get, you were getting emotional earlier. I think I'm almost there too. That was so well stated, Ange. One last quick question to lighten the mood here a little bit. I always, whenever I look on social media with you, I always worry that you're going to be holding a snake, because I am frightened of snakes. I know they're a part of the ecosystem, really important. And for those of you who don't know, who might, don't know about Angela, there's this tendency to, you're not afraid of snakes. Real quickly, why do you take these pictures of you holding up snakes?
I like the snakes. I don't pick up the ones that are dangerous. It's an interesting thing. I think that one of the things that draw me to snakes is just the hard life. It's just this hard, solitary life, and they survive amidst the struggle. And I think that there's just something beautiful about that draws me to them. So, for the same reason I love the desert. I can relate. So.
That's great too. So there you have it, folks, from snake advocate and all around, really seriously wonderful person, one of the best people I've ever known, and can't thank you enough for what you do for the community, what you do for all your friends and family, you and your husband Mike. I mean, just you guys are just incredible people. Thank you so much for being a part of the community.
That. Please keep coming back and visiting us. So, thank you.
I will, for sure. And folks, we'll see you next time out on the trails.
Yes. Bye.
Well, there you have it. One more reason to grab your gear and run along as we track these amazing people doing these incredible things out on the trail, running toward life. Streaming live on Orange County's only community radio station, OC Talk Radio. The University of California, Irvine's Beale Applied Innovation Center.